Uh, Note that the committee is here with the exception of Jack Heineman. Uh, Approval agenda,
Move to approve the agenda.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I didn't see any public comments, and so that takes it to C with the budget update, starting with natural gas purchasing.
Just a quick update for the committee that at the December committee meeting, the committee had a motion to move forward to the December board meeting. That got approved at the December board meeting. Then Ally worked with Symmetry to put that together, and we just attached in the board book what that end result was. It's actually kind of interesting because the rates had dropped between the budget committee meeting and then the board meeting.
30 cents.
Yeah, and then so we were able to then work to lock the rates in. So we just put it in here so you would see how it actually worked. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
So out of curiosity, do we know what's the not regular rate is for January?
I have not.
Do they tell you that in advance, or you just going to see on the bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you guys gonna be tracking the difference, just so we know what it would have been otherwise?
We absolutely could do that. When we get to the end of this, we could just give you a very simple summary of what it would have looked like versus what it did look like.
That's great. I'd appreciate it. Thank you, thanks.
Then we're just, next agenda item is just an end of year balance projection. Just as we noted last month, the Fund 10 budget approved by the school board was balanced. And it included $100,000 contingency account. As of the end of December, the school board has not approved any costs to come out of the contingency budget, so there's really been no new positions or anything of any significance. There's three areas that we're keeping our eye on. The first one is utilities. Locking in 50% of the natural gas rate, of course, reduces the likelihood of any significant overage, given that the rates have come down so much. Transportation fuel clauses, that's another area that could hit the budget up to 100,000. Obviously, fuel costs have come down significantly, so that is a positive for that potential cost. And then the third one, post-employment benefits have not been budgeted for the last several years. We come to this committee in the spring to make a decision on that payment. So just keep in mind, we'll be doing that again this year. And that's really, you know, a high level kind of where we're at with 23-24.
So if the bus situation, is that solely based on if whether the fuel goes up or down, or is that also based upon the cost for the drivers?
So the fuel clause is based on just the diesel rates at $2.50 a gallon, and anything above that is really a cost share for the district and the contractor to pay the cost. The board wanted to set it up that way 7 years ago so that the contractor, so to speak, didn't build in a much higher rate that included fuel at like $3.50 or $4.50. And instead we agreed to help fund the fuel if it went above that level. Obviously it's been above that level. But as it's approaching back down closer to the $2.50 over the last month or so, it reduces our likelihood of having a significant impact there.
Thank you.
If there isn't anything else, we'll go on to 24-25 planning. The first item is just the timeline. You don't have to open that up, Rebecca, but the timeline just shows basically that at this meeting, we present a draft of the 24-25 process, which really gets into the FTE planning for the next year. Ally will do that in just a minute. With a real focus on open enrollment capacity. So We're gonna start with having Ally walk through the FTE planning. Because the FTE planning then impacts the open enrollment planning. Because the open enrollment planning uses the number of sections that have in each school and grade. So Rebecca, would you mind opening up if you want to scroll down, the document called enrollment? No, I'm sorry, if you go down to the next item right there, if you could open that up. And Ally's gonna walk through that, and then we'll come back to the open enrollment, because that'll make more sense after you see this.
Sure, so we worked with all of the principals and then also with the input of Randy on updating the sections for next year based on the sections for this year. So if you scroll down. Yeah, just a little bit farther, that has all, yeah, right there, that one up. So these are our preliminary projections for 24-25. I think the biggest takeaway to note on here is that we have the September student count, the December student count, which is the most current student count that we have, and then our projection for next September. In here, we moved. We had, I think the biggest takeaway that you would want to know from here is that from second to third grade, there would have been a teacher moving from second to third grade. However, after talking with elementary principals and then also Randy, we did not move that section forward. And then we also had another section that would have moved from fourth grade to fifth grade, and we did not move that section forward. So for our planning process right now, we are actually down 2 sections for next year.
We can deal with that through attrition.
When, it's not really a question about this. To me, this is the important data. One of the things that I know we mentioned in the past. I think it's confusing to the public when we put the staffing ratios, that it's the staffing to the entire grade level or building level. And the public sees, oh, you've got 12 teachers per student, thinking that staff is just the teaching staff. And I know we've done that in the past, partly because of our regional staff, it's because a lot of other, that's a lot of districts do that, but somehow, to me, this is a page that's more important for the public to see, so that they understand what the true teaching student ratios are. And I don't know if there's a way to just eliminate that piece from the budget document itself, so it doesn't confuse, or if we maybe highlight this one more clearly so the public understands it.
Sure.
And then one other thing I'll note in this document, Rebecca, if you'll scroll down.
Before you go on, I apologize too. So there's for the middle school, is there not going to be a need to increase FTEs with a new schedule that they have? We're going to be able to make it go, or
How did you figure?
because I didn't see an addition on
We
here.
looked at that for open enrollment as far as.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. It's an important question. So Ally and I actually had a chance, so Tim's in the back. We actually had a chance to meet with Jeff and Tim to talk through it, and we really needed to understand Tim and Jeff's perspective regarding the open enrollment part, which we'll cover next. And so Tim and Jeff helped talk Ally and I through what that looked like from an open enrollment perspective and the scenarios based on the current schedule and the potential schedule. So what you see in this document in front of you and what you will see on the open enrollment calculations is the current schedule.
Okay.
When we took a look at the potential schedule, that actually did not add to the open enrollment capacity just based on the way it was set up. So what we're presenting right now is current schedule.
Okay.
There is a timeline that Jeff and Tim and the team are working on to bring back that discussion. I was a little concerned that like open enrollment might trump that timeline that they were working under. But they helped us learn that the open enrollment process, it doesn't result in more spots. And so basically we're for now using current scenario. But the one thing to keep in mind is that did factor into the discussion Ally and I had with Randy regarding complete FTEs across all of the grades, because this scenario actually has a -2 in the K through 6, and it stays within the optimal level of the board class sizes. Those two could potentially, the FTE could potentially be shifted to the middle school if in the end, the board decides to adopt that schedule. So you'd almost have half of the cost of implementing that program from existing budgetary funds being reallocated. So just know that that's a possibility as we move along the discussion over the next couple of months.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things of feedback I gave to Steve and Ally was, I think in really strong budget years, we just would have rolled with the number of sections. And I think when you start to get a little bit tighter, you just can't do that. So that's kind of why we did the reduction with the same rationale that Steve just provided, that right now, if we didn't go ahead with the schedule, we do have probably retirements or others that'll absorb that. We do go ahead with the schedule, then we already have these sections built in.
Okay. Thank you.
You want to go over to the next page and break it down by school?
Yeah, if you scroll down to the next page, please. So here is where we have it broken down by grade and by school. You can see in fourth grade to fifth grade, there would have been we had the discussion of whether there should be 15 and 15 sections at the intermediate school, but that's where we took the one section away. And then from second grade to third grade, we also have the -1 section at Heritage there. Should I go over the budget stuff?
Sure.
And then if you scroll down more, keep going. Yeah, that paper. So looking at the total budget picture, we used a little bit more detailed information to project for next year, and our deficit is actually quite a bit smaller than it was before, under 20,000 for next year. So just wanted to take that out. Any other questions?
Just as a reminder to board members, this is really just a planning document. As you remember last year, we continue to monitor enrollment throughout the spring, throughout the summer. We ended up bringing to you in August the request to add the kindergarten teacher at Heritage. So this document really is a guide to moving forward, but we're continuously monitoring what's happening for enrollment and all of the different variables as we move forward. Ally did mention that under 24-25, you can see right now that it's pretty much balanced. We talked last month with some of those big variables that are going into that calculation. Those big variables include CPI. So we're continuing to track CPI. Actually, in the next month, we'll know the final number. Health insurance, we've used 3%, which is probably a low number. It's going to be hard to get to 3%. We use 5% for transportation and utilities. We've removed the ESSER funding because the ESSER funding goes away. We're utilizing the operational referendum funds. But we updated this to get it as accurate as we can. The other thing that we'll just note is Ally worked with Julie Gangler to update the enrollment through December, so before break, we were getting the most recent enrollment information. I think that showed something like, was it 12 more students or something from the student count in September? So we've seen some growth in enrollments in September, so that's positive. To be in a situation where we right now are very close to balanced, have incorporated a CPI raise, our compensation systems and increase in health insurance, puts us in a very positive planning process for 24-25. This information will be very helpful as we plan our community survey and gathering feedback from folks. Because when you see 25, 26 and then beyond is where the operational referendums expire, the two expire. And then we need to have a discussion over planning beyond 24-25. So that's kind of the whole premise behind the community survey that the board approved in December. And our intentions are to bring a draft of that to this committee, if possible, in February. Although we did have an initial meeting with our survey firm that threw some different ideas out at us that may push that back a month or so. But at this point, we're going to be working on that, and that really gets into like the 25-26 column and beyond. Mark?
So is it fair to say this is a conservative projection? Because the CPI you used was over 5%. Whereas 3.1 right now. At least that's what I thought I saw. So there is some cushion in there that may be a better projection than it looks right now.
Is that on the next page? Oh,
Yeah, I would say that number though includes the point system also.
Oh,
so the
okay.
2% there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. So Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind going back then the open enrollment. So ultimately, what is an action item in January is the sections that we just shared with you then feed into this open enrollment capacity calculation. If you wouldn't mind bringing that second document up, Rebecca. So what you have in front of you then is two different versions of calculations. So we'll talk about what's on the left versus what's on the right. On the left, just keep in mind, the left is the enrollment we have in December moving forward to next year. So like I said, Allie worked with Julie, made sure that was up to date before we put this out to you before break. And it's taking those students that are currently in kindergarten, moving them to first grade, etc. So on the left is as accurate as we can make it as of before break. On the right, those numbers use our 5-year enrollment projection to estimate the student count for next fall. So on the right, it typically assumes students moving in who aren't here right now. So on the left is what we know of, on the right is a projection. So in the past, the board has asked to see both of those to try to weigh in on making a decision on open enrollment. On the left and on the right, the section information that we just talked about is included in this document. Allie and I decided to break this out into even more detail for you this year. In the past, the K through 4 schools were lumped in together, but we thought it was more important to show you each school, each grade, and the exact number of sections that are called for instead of just lumping it all together. So on the left, just keep in mind the most recent information we have. On the right is the projection. in the end, you do see some differences, like Rebecca, if you wanna blow that up a little bit. And let's look at like Arboretum for just a moment. And can you just, right there's perfect. So if you look on the left and you see Arboretum first grade. Go to the right, in yellow, there would be 2 open enrollment spots. So right now, with the count that we know of, as of right now, there's 78 kindergartners. As those 78 kids go to first grade, that would mean there's 2 openings. Because our policy says it has to be at the optimal level of 20 or below, not the maximum level, the optimal level. To the right, we are factoring in the growth that our model projects between kindergarten and first grade. So to the right, we have no openings in Arboretum at first grade because we are assuming across this model, new students are moving into the district between kindergarten and first grade. The question is, do you believe the patterns of the past will continue? If you do, you maybe would be more comfortable saying first grade at Arboretum, we don't want to approve any spots. Then you would go with the 0 instead of the 2, which is on the left-hand side. So we highlighted the left-hand side because it's the most updated information we have as of today. But as board members, this is one of those things where you weigh in on it and you decide your approach at the board meeting next January. According to the DPI, you just have to have a process that follows your policy. The DPI isn't going to tell you, you take your count in December and use that, or you take some mathematical model and use that. They just want you to have a process and use your policy to make your decision. So as board members, you would weigh in. I think the Arboretum first grade is a perfect example. If your interest is trying to create as many openings as possible for open enrollment, you go to the left and you would say Arboretum first grade and you'd approve the 2. If your interest is being conservative, assuming the growth that's happened in the past happens again, you would go to the right and you would say, I don't want to approve any first grade openings at Arboretum. So I just want to make sure you understand the difference between the 2 calculations and then know next Monday night as board members, you really weigh in. And at some point times in the past, the board has picked some numbers on the left and some on the right. It just depends on what your perspective is. Randy?
Our recommendation is to look at the one on the left. Because I think when you look at this how school finance works, having the open enrollment students come in, there's not plethora of them across.
Can you scroll up?
Yeah, even though we have a number at the middle school, we're
Yeah, but
probably
down.
not gonna get
Other one.
27
Yeah,
kids
keep
in one grade level, but it opens that up to that
Perfect.
possibility of having some more kids in. That immediately impacts it, as opposed to new kids moving in have to go through that 3-year average. So I think that the one on the left, from our perspective, is one to seriously consider.
Does the teacher ratio factor in the open enrollments, or would that be added on? So,
You're
for
talking
example, if you look at Prairie, fourth grade, you got 21.8.
Right.
Over here you have 22. So
How do you figure the ratio in your spreadsheet, Alex?
Yeah,
that-
so it goes by the ratio and then it allows you, it gives you the amount of open spaces before the maximum would be met.
But it's only classroom teachers,
right.
no
Yeah,
other.
I get that part.
Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, in order to get in, to have openings, you have to be under the optimal. So this only takes you up to the optimal.
And how many more would we have? I didn't do the addition. I was lazy. Do we get if we do the one on the left total?
That's a really good question. I think what I would probably say, Mark, is whether you're on the left or the right, there's numbers that are calculated that won't match the interest or the demand from students to apply. Like Randy mentioned, 7th and 8th grade. Whether you're on the left and it's 27 students in 7th grade, or you're on the right and it's 23, we are not going to get 27 applications in one grade. So a lot of times when you look at this document, the difference between the left and the right don't really matter because we're just not gonna get that many applications. But there are spots where it really does matter. So if you look at like 5th grade, on the left, based on the student count that we know right now, there'd be 12 spots available to still stay at the optimal class size or under. To the right, when we use our model that assumes student growth between the years, that changes the enrollment to 0 for open enrollment. But the one thing you keep in mind that Randy just brought up a really important point. This calculation's based on the optimal, so it keeps it at 23 or below. Any growth that would occur, so if you look at 5th grade, and let's just say 12 open enrollment kids come to us in 5th grade, that takes us to the 23. If 5 students move into the community between 4th and 5th grade, that takes us between 23 and 24. The max class size in Bortals is 25. So just keep in mind that whatever you do, either the left or the right, is not going to create us going over like maximum class sizes. That's not what would happen from this. It's just a matter of, do you look at this and do you want to create an opportunity for students to join our district in 5th grade? You look to the left based on what we know today. If you don't, you look to the right and say the projected growth, I'd rather keep it at 0, and then you wouldn't have any openings in 5th grade.
Question?
When it's determined later, in a much later stage, which students are coming in, we don't have to take it up to 12 students, right? If we decide in January that there could be 12 openings, do we have to then, per policy, give 12 students those slots?
Yeah, so a
Okay.
good example, Rebecca, will you scroll up to 4K? Because this is a more very practical example. Where did we put?
It's the
4K?
37.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So, you see the 37 that's underneath the elementary schools. We oftentimes get between 30 and 40 4K applications. There's a lot of families who apply for 4K because they perhaps work in Waunakee and they want their 4-year-old to come to work with them, but then they often go back to their home district for kindergarten. And some of them stay, some of them don't. If we approve 37, we take all 37 that come, and then if we get above 37, we create a waiting list. And then ultimately, if any of the 37 drop out or change their mind, the people on the waiting list can come in. So when we do approve numbers, either the left or the right, it becomes the maximum. But if we do receive applications up to that level, we would be required by the open enrollment law to accept the students.
I think part of Dawn's question is, what if we decide we don't want 37 later on? We only want 30. I don't think we have the ability to do that. We're locking into that.
Okay.
So if this committee has any thoughts that you want us to share for next Monday, we're happy to do it. If there's something else that you want us to do, we just wanted to make sure you saw this because it's certainly connected to the class size. Otherwise, if you don't have any further comments, we will just throw this in the packet for next Monday night. But if there's anything different that you would want to see, we're happy to do it.
Do you want a committee support for the
For your recommendation.
preferred?
Okay, so I would motion that we vote to approve the recommended highlighted in yellow open enrollment proposal.
I guess I'll second it, and that means all in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
That's what we'll present, and obviously there'll be conversation at the board level, and if anybody wants to modify that as has happened in the past.
Yeah.
We can look at that. Usually the greatest conversations around 4K, but we have a lot of history around that item. And then just, I think, some of the background that Steve provided, we'll do again on Monday.
All right, Rec, if you want to move on. So under the next steps, I just want to talk a little bit about what Ally and I will be working on between January and February.
You had one item ahead of that.
What was that?
You go up one.
They.
Oh, we switched to that one and then went back.
All right.
Thank you, yeah. So one of the things that we had a conversation with Jack Heineman about is pre-COVID, our budget planning documents were quite a bit more extensive. Quite a bit more information in there. And we would use our data analytics tool to go out to do some expenditure and revenue estimates to identify for the committee areas where our expenditures or our revenues look different than peer districts. So an example of that I just recently used with the facility committee is I went out and grabbed data on our utility expenditures to show that like our utility spend as a district is in the higher category of the peer districts we look at. So Ally and I are going to reintroduce that concept of looking at data and bringing back into our process areas that we think we should be taking a closer look at. So just know that that's the main thing we'll be working on between January and February is adding more information into our budget planning process, potentially identifying some areas that we think need further study or work, which has come up in the past when we've done this. So our intent is to go back to some of that, deeper dive that we've tried to do in the past. Otherwise, we can move on unless anybody had any further comments. Okay, so other items for discussion. So at the December budget committee meeting, we really ran out of time to jump into this topic. We decided to bring it back. Dawn, I believe you asked for the contract to be attached, so we put the contract in there. One of the things that we wanted to have a conversation about is where to go with the transportation contract. So we went out for a full RFP, request for proposal, prior to that 7-year contract with Lamers. We had 3 or 4 proposals that came in. In the end, the board was quite involved in this because some of the components of the contract were requests from the board to put in there. So there's some things in there that we put in based on feedback from the board. So it was a pretty extensive process like 7 years ago. It expires at the conclusion of the 2024 summer session. Looking at the timing is where administratively we start having concerns. The current contract expires at the end of July, and as you know, a brand new school opens at the beginning of September. We have 2 brand new schools that open during that 3-year extension. We also have a change in the superintendent position. We mentioned the superintendent position, at least right now, works very, very closely with Lamers to make the decision on closing school. And so as Randy and I have talked about this, this is just a challenging area of our operations, and the timing of it is one that we want to have a discussion on. There's a couple of routes to go here. One route is to look at a 3-year extension to get us through the opening of the middle school. And then have the intention of doing what we did before, which is a request for proposal. Another option is the board could ask for a request for proposal. I mean, that can be done. It's only January, we can get that out, we certainly can do that. But if we go down that route, we probably want to get that started in the relatively near future. I brought this up with Randy because obviously he works very closely with Lamers and I wanted to get his perspective. His perspective was that we should discuss the idea of the extension. I don't know, you want to share anything regarding?
I just think that there's a lot going on. This is a really important part of our operations on a daily basis. Switching over to a new contractor, I think is risky at this point, in my opinion. Because you have some things going on with new schools, you have a new superintendent coming in, a lot of different things that are just causing some pieces within our organization that I think that there's, this is a place to kind of build some stability for a few years. 3 years, you'll have done the middle school completely done. And I think at that point, then it's probably makes sense to kind of take a look at the whole picture. But I guess my recommendation would be to look at the 3-year extension to continue the that work and keep stability within our organization for that year.
Right now, the 3-year extension has a lot of TBDs in it. Have there been other like legal? And it was written by Lamers, right? Not the district, the one that was attached.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been written, but we
Rebecca,
added,
would you open that up just so we can?
we added some of the things to
Yeah,
it.
that's
Weird.
Yeah, the contract we did, Randy.
Right.
So we asked Lamers, if you want to go to the second page, please, Rebecca.
I see.
We asked them to share this with us, and you can keep going to the third page, actually, has the to be negotiated. So the reason for that approach, and again, we could propose something different, but the reason that Lamers proposes this is in the past, we meet with them every summer to negotiate the rates based on a variety of factors. The factors include the cost of transportation, the CPI, cost of buses, what does the labor market look like for drivers? We have some incentives included in our contract that we take a look at. And then we come to a decision. And then if you go back to the previous page, Rebecca, the previous page defines the negotiation. And then we typically do that on an annual basis. So Lamers is just suggesting we continue that with one difference. The contract 7 years ago had a range of 1.5% to 3%. They're suggesting the range for negotiation change from 1.5% to 5%. The main reason for that change is, of course, CPI and concerns over where the CPI might be. Now, CPI is trending lower. It's trending down. It looks like it's going to continue trending down. But I believe from their perspective, their concern was back 7 years ago when they agreed to a 7-year arrangement. It just didn't seem like CPI would ever get over 3. And obviously it did, it got way over 3. So their request is that the negotiation that happens in the summer could be between a range of 1.5 to 5. This is their proposal to us. We can give a proposal back to them. I think the first question that we wanted to really throw out there is really the path to take. Because if we want to take the path of full RFP, I would highly recommend that we get going on that immediately. I would probably make this one of my focuses at the school board convention because they're all there. And Allie and I would try to get that out probably would get a draft to you by the February meeting, get it approved by the board in February and out the door the second week in February. So we would really prioritize this to get it moving. If the path is willingness to consider an extension, we have not countered this or come back with, we'd like to see fixed rates or anything else. We just ask them, what would you request? And then we said, we just want to have the discussion about which path we're going to pursue. So that's really where we're at today. If there's openness from this committee to the path of an extension, Ally and I can go back and work on this further. And if you have particular feedback, as an example, if you'd rather see actual fixed rates in there for budgetary reasons, we could do that. If you would rather see it remain at 1.5 to 3, if you want the extension to be an extension of the exact terms that are there now, we can come back with that. So we're just looking for your feedback on the paths. And then if you're open to an extension, what would be your concerns with what you're seeing here?
So opinion of one here, I'm fine going the route of a 3-year extension. My preference would be, rather than have it negotiated year over year, that it is a formula based on index with a not to exceed. So if the not to exceed is 5%, that's fine. But to literally say this was the rate this year, this is what the CPI came in at, whatever the factors are, fuel, labor, I mean, those all have indexes.
Right, yeah.
So whatever that math is, that's applied to that, but that formula is called out in the contract.
Yep.
And then we have a not to exceed.
I agree to the same thing. I like it tied into the CPI or whatever index you would be using and have it established ahead of time. One of the 3-year plan. The question I had in terms of cost savings. Steve, a couple of years ago, we had talked, and I don't know what percent of the population it's used for, but we got vans for special eds, and yet we still have a special ed cost for busing. Would it be cheaper to get a 3rd van, and would that meet our needs, or how big a need is it to have the busing plus vans?
Yeah, so what Mark's referring to is Tiffany, shortly after she was hired, brought forward the idea of special ed vans and district drivers instead of full-size school buses. And those vans were equipped to allow wheelchairs to get on and off the vans. It was done for a couple of reasons. It was significantly more cost effective, but secondarily, Lamers was having a difficult time coming up with the drivers to be able to do that. So it had a mutual benefit. I have not asked Tiffany recently if there may be a need for an additional van and or driver. So why don't you let Ally and I check into that, because that could be a possibility. I'm not sure if the ones that we purchased meet our needs or if we need to consider something else, but we can definitely take a note and check into that.
But that model's been a positive impact for us financially, I believe.
Well, that's why I bring it up, because we had the vans, but then we have special ed busing as well. If we could go to a 3rd van would satisfy,
Sure.
figure out the financial.
I mean, the contract is that they're posted there is if we have those, that's the cost, but we've gone a different route.
That's an if, yeah.
We've had the ability per our contract.
Okay.
And then my second comment is kind of along the vein of what you're talking about. I don't, for peer budget setting and where our costs are, things like that. I don't know if we see other peer contracts for transportation, like that's something publicly visible or not, but I'm used to contracts having warranties, and that includes for contractors, but it's in a very different industry. And there really aren't many in the way of warranties in the original contract. And, if certain performance criteria aren't met, then there's repercussions for that. We
Right.
don't have much like that, and
Right.
maybe that's just because that's just not a thing that happens in this space.
Right,
If it is a thing that could happen, and if there's any kind of precedence for that, I would like to see it added.
okay. So I can definitely do some inquiry into that. And what you're referring to is, the contract that we attached has provisions that create incentives if certain standards are met. But it doesn't necessarily have
Punitive.
punitive if, as an example, if a route isn't being filled by a driver and we have to double up and students have to stay at school, there's no. Right, I get what you're saying. Yeah, and we can definitely look into that. There may be districts who have something like that in effect, and we can definitely take a look at it. Okay, we'll continue working on this down the extension path at this point.
Are you looking to take that to the board at any point here right now, Steve, or what do you want from the committee?
So we will bring back what we think is an extension that matches this discussion in February or March.
Bring it back to this. committee.
Yeah. I don't think we have anything else. So our request will be next Monday to schedule a committee meeting again in early February.
Okay,
Motion to.
motion to adjourn.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Steve. Ally.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for
Thanks,
coming today.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry I was late, guys.
No
Oh,
worries.
that's no
We're
problem.
still done by 8:30. You're doing well.
Well, yeah,